Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tammy Thornton, and I am Wilton Go Green's president. If you don't know who we are a nonprofit based in Wilton, Connecticut, whose mission through education and initiatives, such as the ones tonight, is to help make Wilton the most sustainable town in Connecticut. And we know that's a lofty goal, and we are starting it with simply asking folks to do one thing and to make one change that they can that you can do to make a difference with our community and our environment. And so I just need to quickly thank some folks and just go over a little bit of formatting before we get started. I just want to thank all of our Wilton Go Green board members for helping put our March series together, but especially for this evening's webinar, our Waste Reduction Committee. And those are my co-chair, Tina Duncan, and our other committee members, Megan Devine, Doris Noonan, Lily Umfred, Olivia Christofouli, and Sybil Lamboli. And so tonight, please know that our chat feature is turned off, but we have our question and answer feature at the bottom that you could use to write in any questions as we go along. And we will answer all of our questions at the end of the presentations. So if we do not answer your question live, we will make sure that your question is answered and submitted to our panelists so that we can get that to you after the event and the recording. Okay, so I have another quick little video I'd like to show you before we get started with our topic tonight, and I think it'll help us set the scene. So if you just bear with me 1 second. Sorry. Okay. And patience. Good, good. Being a little slow, I apologize. Here we go.
Can we get strawberries? Okay.
Okay. So I think we can all relate to that video and perhaps what has happened in our own refrigerators at this time. And so tonight really is talking about food and food waste. And for those who may not be following kind of this topic as it's becoming more and more kind of pronounced in our conversations, you know, it's unfortunate, but 35 to 40% of all the food that is created within the United States is never eaten. And with that goes a lot of wasted resources, manpower, energy, and resources with water and seeds and food. And within Connecticut, our Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is really taking a notice when it comes to kind of food waste, but also waste in general. And again, if you've not been following, Connecticut Deep has created the Connecticut Coalition for Sustainable Materials Management. And within that, it's recognizing that Connecticut's infrastructure is aging and our capacity for waste is becoming very limited. And so we really need to rethink waste and rethink where things are going. And food waste is one of those really important and kind of, forgive the pun, low-hanging fruits. So we're going to talk about you know, how we all can help when it comes to the solvable problem of food waste. So As I'm reading their introduction, our guests tonight will turn on their cameras. So Betsy and Jesse Fink are former Wilton residents and founders of Millstone Farm, which they operated from 2005 until 2016. Betsy served on the first strategic advisory board of Wilton Go Green. The Finks were critical contributors to the organics movement here in Wilton, and their work in sustainable agriculture led them to what has been, over 20 years of addressing issues of food waste, food equity, and food injustice. Betsy and Jesse have always been passionate about the environment and first met as undergraduates studying environmental science and forestry. Ultimately, their careers took them both into the corporate world, and Jesse went on to become co-founder and chief operating officer of Priceline, where Betsy also worked. After leaving Priceline in 1999, the Finks turned their energy towards their philanthropic and impact investment work with a focus on environmental issues and in particular, climate change. It was at Millstone Farm where Betsy was growing crops for the farm's CSA and local businesses that the Finks first realized the magnitude of the food waste problem. This ultimately led the Fink Family Foundation and a team of talented experts and advisors to found ReFed, a national nonprofit working to end food loss and waste across the food system. This evening, we're pleased to hear Betsy and Jesse's food waste journey and how it began right here in Wilton. We're also here about the work ReFed is now doing at a national level from Warren Adams, who serves as a strategic advisor to ReFed, as well as philanthropic advisor to the Finks Foundation. So Betsy and Jesse, welcome.
Thank you.
It is lovely to see you tonight. So we have a couple questions. So this part of our presentation is going to be kind of a little Q&A back and forth with myself and Betsy and Jesse. So we're going to start with, how did your work as philanthropist in the areas of environmental issues with an emphasis on climate change, sustainable agriculture, and biodiversity lead you to become farm owners and farmers? Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I first want to thank Tammy and Wilton Go Green for having us speak about food waste and our journey in food waste and agriculture. We're excited to be back in the Wilton community. We miss you all. And I understand there are a few people I know that we know on the call. Becky Bonnell, I want to call out to you for being a co-founder of Wilton Go Green and one of our members on the farm long ago, and Annie Farrell, I think, is on, who helped me build the farm too. So our story was that basically I grew up in upstate New York in farming community, really dairy farming community, and I really came to appreciate the hard work and the community around farming. And we had a lot of give and take between the farmers. My father was a doctor who took care of a lot of the farmers, and we skated on the ponds and I rode in the fields, and I always had a huge garden. And so I always had a connection to farming. And then I served on the American Farmland Trust Board, where the American Farmland Trust really works to help preserve farmland. And I served on Wholesome Wave Board, which works to provide healthy food access to underserved communities. But through that work on both of those boards, I really felt a need to be hands-on. And so we kept looking for places to start a farm, and the land that we bought and built on was right in Wilton, which was the best of all worlds because we wanted it to be part of our community and to have our family very involved in it. Basically, once we got it up and running, we worked with many chefs to cultivate a community around organic food, healthy eating, food access. I'm sure you know some of these chefs: Michelle Nishan from The Dressing Room, Bill Taibbi, Brian Lewis, Tim Labont, and they were wonderful to work with. And what was great about working with them, they're all great chefs, but they really appreciated how we grew, what we grew, how we raised our animals. They knew how to really use the whole animal, and they were very creative, and they worked with us to really experiment and to learn together. So that was a really fun part of growing the farm. It really served as a laboratory for the chefs, but also we had a lot of workshops, from pig carving to raising bees to organic gardening. And the response from the community was really wonderful. And we, it just really fed us to have that kind of response. Um, we had the schools involved, we had teachers involved, we had interns every year. Many of you maybe came to the dinners, which were a way for us to not only present the food that we grew, but also we always did tours. Annie did tours, I did tours, my farm workers did. And it was a way to teach people to connect to their food and to appreciate where their food came from. So I think through the farm, we built a market and understanding of organic produce, which led to conversations around nutrition, quality of food, social justice of food, pricing, distribution, and ultimately led to food waste.
Awesome, awesome. It's an exciting journey for you all for sure. So Betsy, how did your work on the farm lead to recognizing how important food waste was its own issue in that?
Well, it as you said, it takes a lot of inputs to produce the food, whether it's labor or fertilizer or water. And we would deliver to the markets. That's where I saw it really firsthand. So I'd be coming in the front door with our lettuce and our eggs and some produce in the beginning, some different kinds of produce. And out the back door, I wasn't seeing our produce, of course, get thrown out, but there was a lot of produce going out the back door into the garbage. And so that's just heartbreaking. If you're a farmer and you're taking all of this time and energy and love to grow the food and it's getting thrown away, it's really hard to see. So we started working with the markets and the restaurants to deliver crates, and they would fill the crates and we would take it back to the farm and distribute it then to chickens, to the pigs, and then we would compost it all. And what was great about that too, it really is a cycle. And so we had schools and different groups then come in and get soil from us. We used a lot of the soil, but we also had them using the soil too. So basically that's where we saw the real problem. And especially holidays, there are certain times a year with tremendous amount of food waste, and a lot of it could be used for people or for animals. And we started partnering with organizations like Community Plates to recapture some of that food and to capture food off the farm too. There were times when we produced too much to go to the markets and go to the chefs. So they started taking it. But we did realize there was a bigger problem. It wasn't just a local problem. It was bigger than that.
Great. So, so you just talked about how you address the issue of food waste locally and on the farm, but Jesse, how did you start to address the topic on a more national scale?
Well, hi everybody. I was never the farmer. I loved going to Millstone Farm like many people in town. So I thank Betsy for creating it, and I thank Annie for really co-creating with Betsy and all of the farmers who were there. I approach things often from the business side, and when I would listen to Betsy talk about what was happening as she was going, or her farmers were going to the market, and what was coming out the back, I became aware of that as well. And we have been focused on climate change issues for 20 years. And we were climate change, and then sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture, and all of these different things. And what we realize is that food waste is at the core of all of that. And we've actually spent a lot of time in the last 10 years trying to convince people all around the country, philanthropic funders and others, that they should be paying attention to food waste as a solution. And so during that period of time, we have been funding quite a few nonprofits and who are focused on agriculture, focused on climate change. And I remember we had one event at Millstone Farm, and we had a tent that was left over from a wedding from the day before, so that was great. And we invited all of our grantees, and we did this a couple times, all of our grantees to come to Millstone Farm to talk about food waste. And they all came and they all were doing really wonderful work, mostly at the local level, but even at the national level, NRTC, the Harvard Food Law Policy, a couple of other great organizations. And at the end of that day, I think we both realized that food waste is a huge issue, but that no one really understood the magnitude from a national perspective. And it also is a systems problem, and it needs a system solution. So various aspects of food waste were being solved in their silo, but the fact that the food goes from a farm to production, to intermediaries, to restaurants and supermarkets, and eventually it on our plates, there were so many different steps along the way. And so we decided that probably the best thing that we could do was try to create a roadmap to explain to investors and to philanthropic funders and to businesses and governments and municipalities, here are all the different places that food waste is happening, and here are what the solutions are. We asked folks at Mission Point Partners, which is an organization that we're involved in, if they would create what we, was the early days of the ReFed roadmap, to just lay out what that would look like. And what we realized is that there wasn't anything that was done on a national level. And so we collectively created this idea that became ReFed. And the idea was that we would get other philanthropic funders besides ourselves to be involved. And Tina and Woodson Duncan were probably maybe the first time that I went to their house and asked, explain what we were doing. And I was nervous, and they made me feel comfortable, and they made a very generous grant in support of ReFed, and some other folks in the Wilton community as well. And so we started this project, and it really was a project that ended up becoming an independent nonprofit that's known as ReFed, and we'll all hear more from Warren about what ReFed has been up to. But it was quite an undertaking with needed a lot of philanthropic support. We created an advisory board of 40 or 50 professionals from the food industry. And the ReFed roadmap really has made a big difference, and the organization has made a big difference, even from the EPA and the USDA, who are referring to the data and the insights from the roadmap.
Yes, and there's a lot of folks on this call who I know reflect lots of, we quote a lot of stuff from ReFed for data, so it is well used. So our last question for the two of you for now, you ran the farm, you created ReFed, so what now? Are you still actively doing things related to food waste? What's happening with both of you?
I'll start, and you can add on to it. I think those of you on the call who knew us in Wilton know that we take our involvement in community very seriously, and feel good about our years at Wilton, what we did, and all the wonderful people that we met. As Tammy said in the start, we've been out of Wilton physically, although I think emotionally still very well connected. And we're talking to you from Colorado, where there's probably 10 families who have found their way here. So kind of, we have Wilton reunions here as well. But anyway, we're involved in the communities that we live in now. So we spend our winters here in Colorado, and we are involved in the food bank and food access. And we spend the summers in Martha's Vineyard, and we've been very involved with a local organization called Island Grown Initiative, which is all about creating healthy food and supporting the farmers and food access for underserved people. Our focus has been many different things with IGI, but food waste has been at the core. And so we helped start the gleaning program, which has probably been 10 years ago. And we've done other things to help with compost collection, buying a pickup truck so they can go door to door or to the restaurants to pick it up. And then a very large tumbler where you can take the food waste, mix it with cardboard, and what comes out the other side is the beginnings of compost. So in Martha's Vineyard, we're very involved with that. We're still very involved with ReFed and finding ways to communicate the results of refed and getting other people involved in food waste. So food waste is and food insecurity is really important, especially I think we all saw that when the pandemic hit, just how efficient our food system may be, but it's not effective. There's so many people who were food insecure before, and that's, you know, increased so much now. And so we pay a lot of attention to food justice and food equity.
And I think one of the big problems we saw was getting food out of the fields during the pandemic too. And you start to realize who's really involved in getting that food on our plates.
Yeah, and I would say, and I meant to say at the top of the hour that food insecurity is a big topic and deserves its own webinar just to have that conversation. And so uh, we'll comment on it. You've commented on it, but to really dive deep and to really look at it, it deserves its own hour of time. So I appreciate you bringing that up too. Well, this is exciting, and I think we've got a nice basis of kind of where this has all come from and where you've come from. And again, your ties to Wilton are strong. So I'm gonna have you guys hang out in the back in the green room if you don't mind. You can mute and everything. And for our attendees, I have 2 quick poll questions for you before we bring out Warren. So I'm gonna put those polls out here, and if folks could just take a minute to just answer. We have 2 questions, and I'll just read them while people are voting. But, you know, do you compost food scraps at home? That's kind of our conversation that we're talking about, and we have different answers that you could choose. Hopefully, there it goes. I'm like, hopefully my polls are coming up. And then a couple things you'll hear from us about. We have, you know, what areas of food waste would you like to learn more about? And again, if we don't get a chance to dive deeper into each of these topics, then we will make sure that we provide resources and follow-up conversation, because the conversation with all of these topics does need to continue. So I'm going to give folks a little bit more time to answer. And I see that we have a lot of home composters, which is amazing. Kudos to you. I have yet to successfully do that in my own backyard. I rely on another service to help me out. So I'm going to give it about 10 more seconds if you haven't been able to get your poll, and it looks like most people have. And there's some left. Hold on. Here we go. All right, 10 more seconds. We'll do it now, and we'll look at some results. And don't worry if you didn't get to submit your poll answers. So let's get going here. Okay. So if we take a look, so of our attendees that are here tonight, the majority of you are composting at home, which is amazing. Some are using a town drop-off facility, which we'll reference a little bit later. Some of you have a service that picks up. Some of you are doing both. And some of you have yet to do anything with your food scraps, which is okay, and hopefully will inspire you to do a little bit more. Again, areas of food waste to learn more about: composting, 31%, how to reduce food waste in my home, we'll talk about tonight. How to reduce food waste in schools, that's a big conversation, and I'll shed light a little bit on that towards the end. And how to get involved in community action, 45%, and so on. So that's awesome. So thank you for just participating in that quick poll. And I'm going to ask Warren to step out here into the spotlight, and he's going to, while I'm just saying hello, he's going to take a second to share his screen before I disappear. But again, we're so excited to have Warren Adams here, who is the strategic advisor to ReFed, as well as the philanthropic advisor to the Fink Foundation.
Thanks, Tammy. It's a pleasure to join you and the Wilton Go Green community this evening, and congrats on all the work you've already done in regards to food waste as part of the Wilton Zero Waste Schools initiative, and I know many other projects that you've worked on. And just seeing the poll on composting, maybe it's a self-selecting audience tonight, but that's pretty darn impressive that half of you are composting at home. So keep up that good work. Tonight, I hope to share some high-level national data and insights on food waste. but I also want to leave you with some thoughts and resources for what you might do in your own homes and communities. And it looked like that was an area that many of you were interested in from the poll as well. I want to start by saying that awareness of food waste as a critical but solvable issue has certainly come a long way since Betsy and Jesse first focused on the topic and ultimately founded REFED in 2015. REFED's come a long way as well. It's now a national organization led by Dana Gunders. She's a pioneer in the food waste movement and really a subject expert and just a great evangelist for the cause. And for those of you not familiar with REFED, REFED affects change by leveraging its data and insights. It catalyzes capital to spur innovation and scale high impact initiatives. And it sits at the epicenter of the various stakeholders in the food waste system and tries to mobilize and collect those players together to take targeted action. We recently released the roadmap to 2030, and that will be the source of much of the information I'll be sharing with you tonight. So I want to start with some positive news, because a lot of progress is being made or has been made since in the last 5 years. After about a 10% increase in food waste from 2010 through 2016, food waste, the total amount is actually leveled off in the last 4 years. And if you look at it on a per capita basis, it's actually declined slightly, 2% since 2016. So on an individual basis, we're doing better. As the population grows, the total food waste is staying about the same. Another thing that's happened is that the global food companies have really stepped up and made commitments to cut their food waste in half by 2030, and are doing some really not just talking about it, but some action on achieving that. There's also been a huge growth in the number of solution providers, whether they're recycling solutions like anaerobic digestion or composting, or prevention solutions like small plates and shopping lists and things you can do at home. So the pace of innovation and number of innovators and solution providers is growing. And capital providers are also more involved in paying attention. There's more and more success stories of companies that were started and are now doing very well, and that's just drawing more capital providers, for-profit capital providers to the table, but also nonprofit funders, philanthropic funders are looking more and more at all the nonprofits who are doing great work to solve this problem as well. Policy is a really important piece, and just in the past year, over 90 pieces of new legislation were introduced, both federally and nationally. Connecticut was a leader in that. And at the end, I have some suggestions on what it can do to strengthen its policy there. In terms of growing awareness, these are just some headlines because it's really gaining media attention as well. You have companies like Imperfect Foods that many of you have probably been a customer of or heard of, and Appeal becoming billion-dollar companies. You know, you're getting the likes of Oprah. When Oprah invests in something, you know it's gone mainstream and it's going to get a lot of attention. But this headline in the Washington Post just a few weeks ago, I was particularly pleased with because it really tied in the climate change aspect of food waste. And as I'll show you later, you know, food waste is responsible for 8% of the global emissions. And as Tammy said, it's really low-hanging fruit in terms of a solution to mitigating climate change. So all that good news, despite all that progress and awareness, food waste is still a massive problem. These numbers are from our recent Insight Engine and Roadmap to 2030 report. 35% of all food that is produced goes uneaten in the United States. That's $408 billion of value thrown down the drain or into a landfill. And at the same time, and particularly you saw when the effects of the COVID pandemic, 50 million Americans or more are facing food insecurity. And not only that, the environmental impacts of food waste are huge. As I said, 8% of global food emissions come from food waste. In the United States, it's 4%. And approximately 20% of freshwater, cropland use, and landfill is because of food waste. So as we work to reduce food waste, obviously those are impacts, very positive impacts we can make on both environmental and social issues. Food gets wasted at every point of the supply chain. So from the farm to the table. Nationally, 40% or 37% is wasted in your home. Another 28% is wasted at consumer-facing businesses. And by that, we mean retail stores, grocery stores, restaurants. So places where you can help influence and make a decision. So about 50% of all food waste has to do with consumers making individual choices and how the food businesses are interfacing with you. You know, the 80.5 million tons of food in the United States has various reasons for why it's wasted. Those are broken out in this chart. You know, one of the ones on here, the date label concerns, is something you probably all struggle with. What's, you know, best used by or sell by, and what does that mean? Food safety is another issue that ties into whether people feel comfortable donating food to nonprofits and food banks. But the Insight Engine and our online resources go into a lot of detail on all of these causes and impacts of food waste. And I encourage you to explore that when you have time. So what do we do about all this? Refed's analyzed over 40 solutions and come up with a roadmap, which there was an original roadmap done in 2015. This is a redo, and it's kind of it's an online version, continuously updated roadmap to really show all the stakeholders involved, what actions are needed to get us to this 50% reduction of waste by 2030. If we do this, it will take a $14 billion investment. They'll need policy changes, there'll be more innovation will be needed, and collaboration amongst key stakeholders will be key. The payoff is worth it and necessary in my mind. It's a 5x return from a financial perspective. We'll save trillions of gallons of water, 75 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. That's, I think, about 40 million cars off the roads each year. These are all annual numbers, by the way. The food that will be rescued and turned into meals for people in need, it'll be 4 billion meals a year. And over the 10 years, there'll be a minimum of 50,000 jobs created through food waste businesses. Again, if you go online and have time at some point, the Insight Engine shows you solution by solution for the 40 solutions we've modeled. What's their financial benefit? You can sort it by impact on climate, how much water is saved, how many meals are created, how many jobs. You can, from a stakeholder perspective, you can say, I'm a food business, I'm a consumer, I'm a retail business. You can look at this nationally, you can look at it from a state basis. Food type, you can look at produce. The strawberry film at the beginning, you know, you could look at strawberries if you want, and really, and then the additional thing is that for each of these solutions, there's a fact sheet that says all of the barriers to these things happening, how much capital is needed, from what type of investors is that capital needed, a real play-by-play for how we actually implement these solutions that ReFed is recommending. In terms of what you can do at home to reduce food waste, we call this the Food Waste 5. And the Food Waste 5 are 5 easy to use strategies to get the most of the food that you're buying. The first is planning ahead. Don't do like I do and go to the grocery store and go up and down every aisle and just see stuff and put it in the cart and then figure out what you're going to cook with it. Go think a few days ahead or a week ahead, make menus, consider what you're eating, and really buy what you're going to be making and eating that week. The second of the 5 is to store your food properly. And for many of you, just really doing some homework on that will be educational. Different foods need to be stored differently. For example, fresh herbs can be stored in a glass of water like flowers in your fridge and last a lot longer. The third is to use your freezer. Your freezer is a magic pause button to keep food fresh longer, and you can freeze almost anything, cooked or uncooked. And the benefit is that when you don't feel like cooking one night, you just grab something out of the freezer, heat it up, and eat if you've saved the food that you would have thrown out otherwise. The fourth is learn the labels. The most common date labels are best if used by or sell by or expires on or and then they're followed by a specific date. Learning what those labels really mean can save you from throwing something away when it's perfectly good to eat. And remember that date labels typically refer to quality, not safety. So use your best judgment. If a product looks good, smells good, tastes good, it's probably okay to eat. The last one is to eat your leftovers. So as you're thinking about what you'll be eating for the week, plan in advance a day to eat the leftovers and the excess food in your fridge. So make meals like tacos or soups or salads where you can be creative with a range of different ingredients. Some people, kind of to make it fun for families, they call them Wasteless Wednesdays or Stir Fridays, and you can really make it something that's interesting and an activity for the family. Additional actions you can take. So the prior page was prevention solutions, and really that's the top of the pyramid. We want to prevent food from going to waste by taking those actions. The second level is if you're not going to eat it, give it away. So donate food or money or your time to local food banks or support food waste nonprofits such as Food Rescue US, which is an organization that the Finks had funded back in 2012 and 13 and 14 and 15 before it changed its name. The third and really the bottom of the pyramid, still important, is if it's going to go to waste, don't throw it in the garbage. Recycle it, do it in your own backyard. Amazingly, 49% of you are doing that. If that's not practical or something you want to do, subscribe to one of the residential pickup services in your neighborhood. And I know there's several options to do that in Connecticut. The third would be bring your food scraps to a centralized drop-off site. Tammy and Wilton Go Green are working on that in Wilton. And then the final category is policy and advocating. So work as a group to strengthen Connecticut's organic waste regulations. Restaurants could be included. The limit of a ton a week now could be reduced as it's being done in Massachusetts to 1/2 ton, which would capture more sources of food waste. Enforcement could be embedded. I believe in Connecticut, there's really not an enforcement mechanism now. Another policy issue would be to evolve to unit-based pricing for waste pickup. So you're not paying more if you're separating your food waste. because you're paying less for the regular pickup that doesn't have that food waste in it. And the third is doing what Tammy is doing, is engaging with organizations like the Center for Eco-Technology and collaborations like the Connecticut Coalition for Sustainable Materials Management. And I think Tammy is going to come back on now and talk more about some of the specific things that Wilton Go Green is doing on that front.
Thank you, Warren. And you don't have to go too far because we'll get to questions and answers in there. But I do want to say, just on a personal note, like I call it Hodgepodge Thursday with my kids. So Thursdays are designated leftover night. And they just laugh at me because I think that's the funniest word, but I just put everything from the fridge out on the counter and everybody just gets to pick something to eat. So for us as a family, Thursday night is leftover night. And I do think that for all of us listening, and again, there are many of you on here who are dealing with food waste on a level in your own towns, and there are amazing towns in Connecticut that have put together their own, municipal food scrap collection program for their residents for free. And so if you're in Westport, or you're in, New Canaan or Darien or Greenwich, or you're in Brookfield, or you're in Reading, and then further out onto the other, other parts of the state, just look into your town to see whether your town does already have that program for you. We have been working diligently here personally, for those of you that are on in Wilton, to bring municipal collection for our residents as well. And we'll continue to work on that. And so the difference that we do need to make for many folks is that, backyard composting is different than commercial pickup composting, where, commercial pickup composting can take all of your food, your bones, your meats, your cheeses, your fish, where most backyard composting, won't do all that. So there are some folks who are on our poll that did both. They did backyard composting for the foods that can go in the backyard, and then they did either drop off or residential pickup for all those foods that could not. And so I will say it can be overwhelming to think about those top 5 waste, kind of those top 5 things to do with reducing waste. But as we like to say, especially in 2021 for Wilton Go Green, do one thing, pick one thing. Just pick one thing, start to meal plan. Maybe that's what you're going to do next week. You're going to sit down and you're going to look. We love to tell people to shop your pantry first. Go down and look at all the food you've already collected and what can you already make. And there's great apps out there like All Recipes that you could put in a list of foods and they could give you some suggestive recipes. Warren mentioned that hierarchy, that EPA food hierarchy, and really at the top is source, reduction. And then going down, we end up in the incinerator. And so we're really at the top trying to reduce the food waste at the source as best we can. So we do have some great questions in our question and answer period. So Warren and Betsy and Jesse, if you want to just kind of come back on, I do want to make sure we get to folks' questions. And again, if we don't quite get to your question live, then please know we will have our panelists answer questions and we will get it back to you. So Betsy, this goes back to kind of the beginning when you were talking about Millstone Farm. One of our attendees had said, you had mentioned you were composting on site. And I'm not sure if it was really to a very large extent, but they said, as a commercial concern, did you face any permitting issues with the state to compost on site? And so I'm not sure if that really pertained to you on a farm on the compost level, but.
We did not have permits to do it on site. I don't think it was so large that we needed to do that. Yeah. And actually a lot of the raw food was utilized by our pigs or the chickens. And so what was left, we actually macerated it basically and turned it into our piles. So we didn't have issues around that.
Great.
I'm sorry. I would just say too, what we found on a personal level in Martha's Vineyard, we have a tumbler that breaks it down enough that when you put it into your compost piles, again, you don't have rodent bird problems, those kind of things. And those are in IGI, we do the same at IGI. We found that you have to get to a certain point before you put it out so that you're not creating problems that you don't want.
That's great. And I just wanted to get down here, and maybe you can all talk about this, or Warren more specifically. Can you talk about the connection between food waste and greenhouse gases? Can you guys, either between the three of you or one of you, want to talk a little bit more specifically about how they're connected?
Yeah. Um, I'll start and then Warren will correct me. Because I realize as we're talking about it, uh, we may have not been clear, but essentially, when food waste ends up in a landfill, it creates methane, and methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. And so the goal is to keep food waste any way we possibly can out of the landfills. Um, the hierarchy that Tammy, you talked about and Warren talked about, prevention first, just doing everything as a country that we can to prevent the food from being wasted. The second, recovery, and that's where if we get in the middle of it, we can recapture food that wasn't going to be used or sold and redirect it so that it can be used to solve or help with food insecurity. But even after all of that's done, there still is so much food. It's, oftentimes it's scraps. Even, in our situation, we try to be smart about everything we do, but there still are rinds and other things like that. So as gets mixed with regular trash, which what happens around the country if you don't separate it goes into the landfills, it gets buried in the landfills, and that creates the methane. So the goal is really to do everything we can so it gets out of the waste stream and then gets treated either as composting or animal feed, or can be used for anaerobic digestion to create energy. But the real goal is to keep it out of the landfill. Warren, you want to add to that?
Just a little bit. The story of the strawberry is relevant here because at every stage of food's life cycle, it's building its carbon footprint. So how much energy and fertilizer went into growing that strawberry, and the people who work to grow that strawberry, getting to work, like really the full footprint of it. And then it gets on a truck and it moves to processing and it gets packaged, and there's energy and more carbon footprint attached to that strawberry. And then it goes to a store and it gets refrigerated and put on a shelf. So it's just growing, growing, growing. And if it gets eaten at that point, great. If it gets upcycled to some other food in like a salad bar, it still gets eaten. That's another way of not letting food go to waste. In the end, the final step going to landfill is an additional bit, but the methane part is really not the big part of all of the gases that are the greenhouse gases that are emitted, although methane is such a potent greenhouse gas. But REFED's done an impact calculator and worked with the EPA to really do that entire life cycle of all the different categories of food, and that's built into our modeling and being used by food businesses now and others.
That's great. And I think, yes, going back to the strawberry is a wonderful example. So we have a question here. Do you have any thoughts on the food sovereignty movement versus a food security movement? And if that isn't clear, we can ask our attendee to maybe elaborate, but let me know.
I think we understand it. If you want to ask the attendee if they want to say more, if that's an easy thing to do, we can do that, or we can.
I have to find her. Hold on there, Martha. I have to find you. If you're okay with speaking, yeah. Hold on one second. I gotta find you, and I gotta let her talk. Hold on. Here we go. Martha, did you want to elaborate on your question?
Yeah, so I guess I'm a fan of the food sovereignty movement because it really takes into account kind of everybody along the food chain, from the farmer to the people working in the production of the food, to the consumer. Really honoring the dignity of all the people involved in the food system. And I think it also just takes away the idea of food as a commodity, especially for the final consumer, especially in the food insecurity world, where I might be food secure if I have, a jar of Skippy peanut butter and a loaf of bread. Um, but that's, so I'm not hungry, but I'm not really food secure, I would say.
Thank you, Martha. Jesse, Betsy, Warren?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure I could add much to that, with the exception that during the pandemic, we saw how fragile the food system was and how inequitable it was, from all different ways. Just actually early on seeing the employees in the food business, whether they were at a meat packing plant or neck to neck picking strawberries in California, were getting hit harder with the virus than other people. And then folks all throughout the food supply chain at grocery stores, obviously restaurants have been closed, but the same issues there. So the food system has grown to be a big ag and big food systems, but I think the work that's happening at the local level, the work that Betsy and Annie did and so many small farmers continue to do, and food co-ops, there's an awareness and an enlightenment that's happening to the food systems.
I think, I would also, we haven't touched on Nogales, which is where we also work, which is one of the ports from Mexico. And I think as you've seen in the news recently, most of our produce in the winter comes through Mexico, and it comes through 3 ports. And we've studied this for years and have watched tractor trailer loads of food get dumped. Even though it's a small percentage, it's a huge amount of food. And when you talk about food sovereignty, most of the workers in Mexico who are sending this food over are food insecure. And I think, it doesn't matter what side of the border you're on. I think we all have to think about that food chain.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm gonna get to one more question, but I forgot to announce my winner of my goodie bag. So I just want to say before I forget again, that Jamie K from Greenwich is our winner, so we'll be in touch. So congratulations to Jamie. So another question we have here, and again, I apologize, we won't get to all of your amazing questions, but I will send them to our panelists and we will get answers for everybody back. But do you guys, with your work with ReFed, or have you seen any model ordinances or state regulations that would include restaurants, schools, and institutions like hospitals when it comes to capturing food waste? And you mentioned the CCSM for Connecticut, and they're really working on expanding on the regulations with the ordinances that are currently in state. But have you guys experienced that with your work with ReFed?
We have, and I'm happy to follow up with more information on that and engage with the person who asked that question. But there's some great models. California has a good model. Massachusetts is a step beyond Connecticut's. ReFed partners with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, and together we have a policy tracker online, and it looks at both current and pending legislation at local, state, and federal level, and really the best practices and so on. So if a group in a state were saying, how could we make it better? Definitely a lot of best-in-class examples there.
I can add to that too, Warren, if we talk about the Center for Environmental Technology, CET, which has done a lot of work in Connecticut, a lot of work in Massachusetts, and really provides technical assistance to schools and businesses who want to reduce their food waste. The challenge that we have found is that there are these state organic bans like Connecticut and Massachusetts have. They're not followed. And there's a chicken and egg of making sure that there's an infrastructure, for instance, in composting, because the ordinance says as long as there's, I think, 35 miles, you have to compost if you're a restaurant or a large food waste supplier. The problem is it's not really enforced at this point in time. So we're kind of in a tweener section right now that hopefully in the next couple of years when we have these progressive policies, they actually get implemented and enforced, and the whole thing will flip over.
Right. Yes. And again, I think that's one of the great things we're seeing come out of the CCSM for Connecticut is looking at kind of this enforcement and expansion, and I think will help Connecticut as a whole. So I just want to say again that I cannot thank you both, Betsy and Jesse, and also Warren, for coming tonight. We are at the top of the hour, so I do like to be courteous to everybody's time. Food waste is a huge issue. It's a big issue and it can be daunting, but if I haven't said it enough, it's pick one thing, folks, on this call. Pick one thing that you can do to make a difference, even just in your own homes with your habits with food waste. And we will be sending lots of resources, and give us a couple days to get everything to everybody. And again, reach out to your towns, organizations like Wilton Go Green, who I know out there are doing similar work and working on a very local level to really reduce the impact of food waste in your own towns. So more to come. Great conversation. Thank you to everybody who came tonight. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our Wilton Go Green board and committee members. And yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.